we are Melungeon. We are Melungeon.
All right. Hello and welcome everyone to episode 8 of season 6 of the Melungeon Voices podcast. We have with us today Dr. Matthew Crosston. Dr. Crosston is the Director of Academic Transformation and Assistant Vice President of Online Programs at Bowie State University. He specializes in international security, intelligence studies, global leadership, and policy change and equity justice workshops. He is an acclaimed author and international speaker who consults with governments, media organizations, and academic institutions on a range of issues covering peace mediation, irregular warfare, intelligence dilemmas, and education innovation. As always, I am your host, Heather Angelina, the president of the Melungeon Heritage Association, and with me, my co-host, Brooke Gibbons. Hey, Brooke, how's it going?
Great. You know, we've had a drought here in Charlotte, so we've been enjoying the rain that we finally got this past week. So
I
my
know
yard is happy.
we got a lot of rain this week. But
Yes.
yeah, you're right. We needed it. And by
Yeah.
the way, how did your art exhibit go last month?
It was very good, very well attended. And you came to the artist talk, so I appreciate that. And it was really nice to actually talk about the art because usually we just exhibit things. We don't usually get to talk about it with the general public. So that was really fun too, and a good challenge to talk it all out with everybody.
I thoroughly enjoyed myself. It was excellent.
Thank you.
All right. So Matthew, so how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm going to try and live up to that great introduction you just gave. So I'll try my best.
I think you will. So my first question to you, Matthew, is for our viewers and listeners, tell us a little bit about your personal family ancestry and how you discovered your mixed ancestry, or Melungeon ancestors.
For me, it actually started out, ironically enough, with the need for me to actually take a genetic test that was actually in connection with a research project that I was actually about to engage in. That had nothing to do with anything of this nature or sort. It was sort of a side project, and that subsequently, the results of that genetic test sort of sent me down this rabbit hole of self-discovery and family history, both acknowledged and unacknowledged. That has been really, really fascinating for me because it started out the my family always had a fairly good grounding in terms of the maternal side of the family, knowing its history, but the paternal side, with an estranged father who has been passed now for 15 years, knew really nothing about that side at all, other than the simple fact that he always claimed to me to be 100% Italian. That was literally all I knew. Uh, and the genetic test came back to reveal that my 100% Italian father gave me exactly 8% Italian Greek heritage. And I'm not a mathematician. That's not where my scholarship is. But I felt fairly confident that a 100% Italian father should give me more than 8%. But in addition to that, it also gave me two other aspects of genetic history, genetic heritage that definitely had no connection to the maternal side of the family. That being a full 25% stake Scandinavian, specifically Dutch. And then this small 1% almost symbolic West African, specifically Senegalese heritage. I suddenly was just very curious about that. Obviously, just my own understanding of racial studies in America over the years. I knew instantly what Dutch and Senegal, how they might be sordidly connected, quite frankly, but how that might touch upon me personally, I had no clue. And that investigation led me going back generations upon generations in my own family history. And even parallel to that, I was doing some historical research and came upon this term that was used over and over again, very amorphously, called the Black Dutch community. which largely was in the mid-Atlantic region, but not exclusively. And it was very much sort of a pre-founding of independent America, so leading up to before the Revolutionary War. And it was sort of a catch-all term. And I think it might have even been before the term Melungeon ever even came into play in terms of American history. But it was this catch-all term for people of any mixed heritage. And I had found in the diving deep on the paternal side of my family, I think this goes into your next question, but when I found this Gustavus Adolphus Crosston, who had fought in the Revolutionary War, I thought, oh, this is actually very interesting, because while Black Dutch was kind of an somewhat derogatory catch-all term for people of any kind of mixed heritage in pre-founding America at the time, I was one of those weird ones. I thought it was like, oh, because Gustavus was actually literally half Dutch and half Senegalese. So he actually was Black Dutch, because all the historical documents I had uncovered seemed to indicate, well, people who are called Black Dutch often weren't didn't really necessarily have African heritage or Dutch Scandinavian heritage, and yet here my ancestor was literally just that. So it just sort of kept sending me on my way to find out more about him and subsequent generations.
Isn't that funny, Matthew? You're not the only person. In fact, it's happened to me too, where a lot of us, we know a whole lot about one side of our family and not so much about the other. That also happened to me as well with my father's side. I knew very little about his side of the family, which is funny because he actually lived in the house with us. He just wasn't a big talker. So I had to go on a mission after he passed away to find out things. So
Right.
you mentioned your ancestor, Gustavus Adolphus Crosston. He fought in the American Revolution and in fact fought alongside General George Washington at the Battle of Valley Forge. Can you share some more about him and what you've been learning about him?
Absolutely. What I discovered, first of all, is, as was very much the case, one of the things that was fascinating to me, as far as I can tell, I've not been able to find a single document to contradict this understanding, is that I cannot get past him. So I can't find a father or mother of Gustavus, and his nickname was Dolphin. So I always call him Dolphin Crosston. Um, I don't know about his parentage, despite truly being fully half Senegalese and half Dutch, but he was always a free person of color in pre-revolutionary America and post-revolutionary America. So at no point in time did his line actually fall victim to slavery, which only to me deepens the fascination I have for him, because it shows there are not actually many lines of this nature in American history that doesn't end up crossing at some point with slavery. So to have an unbroken line of free people of color is quite unique from what I've been able to read and understand. But he was 17 years old, 18, he just turned 18 years old when the Revolutionary War started. He enlisted. He was a member of the Virginia militia, which is what brought him under the guidance and under the command of General George Washington. He not only fought at Valley Forge, but he fought at several other battles. So I feel actually very lucky that he even made it out of the war to go through that many different battles, even in fact ending. And in a strange way, maybe what saved his life was ultimately in his last battle he fought, he actually was captured by the British and spent the remainder of the Revolutionary War as a POW in a prisoner of war camp in South Carolina. And when the war finally ended with America being victorious and defeating the British, the story goes that he walked back from South Carolina to what was then just greater Virginia, basically. West Virginia was not yet a state, but it was in that area that is now sort of the northern Appalachian Ridge area. It's basically, it is West Virginia now, but was Virginia then, sort of Western Virginia. And he was given a pension for his service, with serving with valor and courageousness, was given a pension, and also was given 100 acres of land out there, which is, the pension was $8 a month. And I actually looked it up this morning to be sure. $8 a month in today's money is about $400 a month. So this is no joke. Like, this is no joke as far as living in 1785 America, to be getting $8 a month from the government and being given 100 acres of land for your service as a member of the Virginia militia. So clearly he fought with valor and honor. And there's, even to this day, I have not visited it yet. I'm determined to still find it. Somewhere on the lonely state highway road out there between Virginia and West Virginia, there still stands a bronze plaque that supposedly is honoring Gustavus Dolphin Crosston for having 10 years after the Revolutionary War walked to Washington, D.C. because he had stopped receiving his pension. And he, in protest, wanted to reestablish his pension, which he actually did and got it increased to $12 a month. So that actually still technically somewhere out there in the hinterlands of the Virginia-West Virginia border, that plaque still stands. So that's a little bit in a nutshell of his service and his contribution to the founding of America.
Wow, what an incredible story. I love that. And I love that for him that he was able to even get more. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So, you had mentioned about, him being a free person of color and how he was actually a free person of color, and your ancestors were free people of color. We have mentioned before on the podcast, we have spoken a little bit about the one drop rule. And, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the one drop rule. What is it? How did it affect people of mixed ancestry, free people of color? So, yeah, if you can tell us a little more about that.
It, ultimately, it's obviously not a very positive aspect of American history, in the sense that it was something that really came about in post-Revolutionary War America, when the founding fathers were actually truly developing the foundational documents of American society and what our political structures were going to look like. The one drop rule, whether officially written down in documentation or just simply sort of de facto acknowledged perceptionally and attitudinally by most Americans, it really was just simply the ultimate legal act of arbitrary repression and isolation. Right. And that was simply saying, and it also speaks a little bit, which in coming up questions is things I want to sort of elaborate more extensively on. But this period just before the Revolutionary War and just after the Revolutionary War, as America was trying to figure out itself and its founding institutions and what was it going to look like, clearly this idea of whether they be free people of color or former slaves or runaway slaves or people of mixed heritage, this was not uncommon. These people were present all throughout America, especially in the mid-Atlantic and southern regions of America, to be sure. And suddenly this one drop rule started emerging in the early 1800s, which was basically just simply, if you have even perceived, again, we obviously weren't doing genetic testing in 1805, but if you were perceived to have even one drop of African blood in you, you would be deemed African. And the reason that mattered is because that development of the founding documents of the nation was basically creating a de facto society that, though the principles of freedom were intact and amazing, the sort of things we are still rightly proud of today as we're getting close to our 250th anniversary, is the fact that it was in practice, though, set up for white male property holders. And if you were not a white male property holder, then yes, you could live in this country, but you were not really going to have a significant role to play in that country. And the one drop rule, to a certain degree, was actually, you could almost say, really was for people like my 5 times great grandfather, because they were the sort of this racialized identity that was coming to the forefront as America developed. They started realizing, well, there's a lot of people here that we don't really know what they are. They look they look Black Dutch or Spanish or Southern Italian. We don't know who they are. We don't know what kind of background. We've got to find a way to identify them, because this sort of racialized ideology that unfortunately came over from Western Europe to American shores after the Revolutionary War and became sort of a fake intellectual discussion, if you will. They started thinking about quote unquote racial purity. And so the one drop rule was really more specifically than not for ex-slaves or freed slaves, but actually for people like my 5 times great grandfather, who didn't necessarily quote unquote look Black. Therefore, no one wanted to make the mistake of letting mixed people into the running of the country. And this just happened to me this semester, actually, at Bowie State, I was teaching a class called Multicultural Issues in Criminal Justice. And these are highly accomplished, highly intelligent students of color who are majoring in criminal justice, going to have a degree in criminal justice. And I don't know whether, I didn't know at first whether it aged me. Was it a point of showing how old I have become? Or is it maybe a small indictment against secondary education in America? These students who, again, majoring in criminal justice, they had never heard of the one drop rule. Okay. And now, so I can remember specifically being taught about the one drop rule when I was probably first about 10 years old. And at the time, I was a 10-year-old white boy, quote unquote, in Massachusetts. So I wasn't in the deep South. I wasn't in the mid-Atlantic. I wasn't in any connection to that. But I can specifically remember being taught about the one drop rule in middle school, in even late elementary school. So the fact that I've now become acquainted with the idea that really accomplished, really, because this is not an aspersion against my students, these really accomplished students who are highly intelligent in a very prestigious HBCU in America, and they've just never been taught it. They've never been exposed to it before they even got to college. That sort of tells us the fight that we're fighting in terms of Melungeon ancestry and heritage and history overall.
Yeah, that is so interesting. That's like a whole other conversation. We need to
That's
come
the
back
next
for a part
podcast.
two. Yeah, this is a part two. This is a part
Yes,
two follow-up.
I agree with Brooke. I agree.
Yeah, okay. We need to come back to this. All right. So Matthew, tell us more about what does it mean to be passing and what privileges could it afford someone of mixed ancestry, but also what did those who chose to pass, what did they lose culturally and in their individuality?
This is another, I think it's another great question in terms of people like Dolphin, Crosston, and his subsequent ancestors, his progeny, because for them it really was, to a certain extent, sadly, it was probably a question about literal survival, right? In today's world where we have so many conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, about being proud of your heritage, knowing your heritage, these are all incredibly important things, and of which obviously I wholeheartedly agree. But if you're facing the society you faced in the early 19th century, and you actually physically looked like you could mix in with the dominant culture, that people could actually think you are white, I don't, let me just put it this way. I don't blame necessarily my ancestors if they had the opportunity to pass and be considered white, because this wasn't about I personally do not think this was about self-loathing or self-hatred. This was about, I need to be able to provide for myself, for my family. I want them to not be exposed to the potential violence and the potential repression and oppression that if I can't pass, that's what I'm going to face. Right? If they think of me not as white, they will inflict that type of American society upon me. So it's sort of like we may have a single framework of political documentation for the country, but there were always two Americas, right? There was an America for the white male property holder, and then there was America for everybody else. And if you happen to be a person of color, and again, the one drop rule again sort of shows you that you didn't have to be like really a person of color. You didn't have to even necessarily look like a person of color. If they thought you were a person of color and had that heritage, then you were going to face the full weight of the repression of that alternative society. So the ability to pass as a white person, maybe I'm just too practical and not as principled on this, is like I don't blame any of the ancestors that said I'm going to protect my children, I'm going to protect my family, and take this opportunity to just blend in. As far as the cultural loss, it's hard for me to estimate that necessarily, because Melungeons, as I've come to know from my own research, have this fascinating, almost self-isolating history, right? That especially in the mid-Atlantic region, to move away from the coast, because that's where you would see these rules applied more viciously, whether it's the one drop rule or whether it's oppression of any kind of physical form, assuming you must be somehow connected to slavery or were an ex-slave. They moved west. They moved into the hinterlands of Western Virginia and ultimately West Virginia and Appalachia in order to just think, well, at least I can take care of my own weekend subsistence farm here and we'll be left alone. So there's culturally, and there's a loss there. The idea that you have to separate out from the society, especially in my family's case, for someone who the founding father of it literally fought for that country's independence. And then you feel you have to take your family away from civilization in order to be protected. There's without doubt a cultural loss with that. And sometimes I think people forget that the richness of our cultures is only truly reflected when we're surrounded by other cultures. It's not just if we're only by ourselves with our people in our area and we're the only ones around. You can't ever truly understand or appreciate how rich your culture is if it's the only one you know and see. So there is a loss to that as a consequence of passing. And if you can't pass, isolate yourself so you feel you're helping your family escape repression.
I completely agree with you, Matthew. And it makes me think like, and that's kind of how I feel. I mean, and I feel a lot of people, like when people reach out to the organization, that's what they, you can tell that they're feeling like, I lost something. And you're right. It's like because our ancestors, our Melungeon ancestors had to hide their ancestry, had to, and if they were able to pass for white, they did, to survive. I remember reading stories about, and particularly free people of color, being kidnapped and sold into
Mm-hmm.
slavery. So you
Yep.
begin to realize you're like, I mean, they had to do what they had to do, but then us today, we do, now we're missing those parts of those cultures, and so it's like, yeah, it's a shame, but completely understandable.
Mm-hmm.
And also, of course, and speaking of passing, since we're talking about that, uh, those who chose to pass for white, this brings us to white privilege. What is white privilege? And can you give us some examples?
It's funny how that is a term that's almost in my world, in formal academia, it's become almost a minefield, the term. And unfortunately, speaking of other podcast worthy issues, it's one of the issues that we actually almost try to avoid, in the sense that it's a safe word to say, quote unquote, safe if you're in a group full of liberal progressives, but it's a minefield of a word if you're in a group full of conservative leaning students. And we're almost discouraged from trying to bring those two groups together anymore. Like, because you're afraid of, well, can you really truly guarantee that it remains civil and respectful as a form of discussion? Can you really handle an open-ended debate where people so virulently disagree? I'm of the old school variety, which I think that's the entire point of the academy. So the fact that maybe some universities in general are almost actively, and I'm talking about some of our most historical and prestigious. My PhD is from Brown, and so the Ivy League, I think, has almost shown a lot of reluctance to engage these things now. To say, like, well, if we can't guarantee the safety of students and the civility of the discussion, we'd rather just not have the discussion. So as a result, I think as professors, what we've tried to do is, can we find some other way to connect what I really want to talk about through a term that won't necessarily be as controversial or as triggering to young students today? And when it comes to white privilege, for me, it's what I have found has worked for me, at least in particular, is switching from race over to gender and talking instead about male privilege. And because I'll ask young male students all the time, I said, let's just imagine like you're going out this weekend and you want to have a great time. Do you spend any time thinking about, well, what should I wear? Do I have to be careful about what I wear? Who am I going with? Can I go out alone? Is it all right for me to go? What place am I going to? What is that place like? How should I behave? Are there certain things maybe I shouldn't say? And literally 99.9% of the young male students are like, what are you talking about? I don't do any of that. Like, I wear what I want, I go where I want to go, I act the way I want to act, and I say what I want to say. And I said, perfect. I'm super excited that you did say that, because that's exactly what all of your female peers cannot do. Like, it's not that they think it's just, or they think it's unjust. They think it's unfair, but they have to acknowledge that I have to keep aware of what people's perception could possibly be about where I go or what I'm wearing or if I'm alone or how I talk to someone or what I say. It's not that it's saying we're not endorsing it at all. We're saying it's wrong, but that's an example that they have to do because they have to be concerned about their own physical safety, their own physical environment in which they're in socially. And you never have to do that as a young male student. And I was like, that is what privilege is, right? That is what privilege is. Because I think for me, ironically enough, whether gender or race, the real hang up or the real snag for this discussion has been actually not on the term white, but on the term privilege. Because most people who hear it, they almost instantaneously, this is my opinion, again, just personal, but backed up by my experience, is that they associate the term privilege with physical manifestations of things. Like they're thinking, well, I don't live in a big house. I don't have 5 luxury cars in my garage. I don't go on luxury vacations every year. I don't have a super powerful job and I don't command hundreds of people to do my beck and call. So what privilege are you talking about? So trying to disentangle privilege from just the accumulation of stuff and how big is your house or how expensive is your car, and make them see more in terms of like the example we just gave socially about where in your mindset there are certain things you don't have to be concerned about, but other people who are different from you do. That there's certain things, and the easiest way is always traditionally we always end up talking, of course, about if you get pulled over for speeding. There are certain things that you're not worried about as a young white student of getting pulled over, and that really gives you a certain maybe reckless freedom, because some of the videos I see of how people talk to police officers blows my mind. It's like that's changed as well, because when I was a young man growing up, we were taught don't mouth off to police officers. You're just asking for not. We didn't think we were going to get killed, but we thought they can make your life miserable. If you're a jerk to them, they can be a jerk to you, and their jerkdom extends far beyond your jerkdom. So don't be a jerk is basically how we were taught as young kids growing up in the shadow of Boston. But that point is privilege. I like focusing on privilege as a teaching tool from the perspective of let's not think about the physical things. Let's not think about the material things or the monetary things. Let's think about mentally, emotionally, attitudinally, perceptionally, where we have certain ingrained, embedded advantages because of the way our society has been constructed and built that gives us a certain freedom of action and freedom of thought that other people don't. And that seems to work better. That seems to work better, at least of encouraging people to give more thought to the concept itself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because while you're speaking, I am remembering this episode from Family Matters from 30 years ago, and this exact thing happened, talking about gender
Are you even
privilege.
old enough to have
Yeah.
watched that show?
Yeah. And Eddie, the brother, was allowed to go somewhere for the weekend with friends that his parents had never met. And Laura, his sister, was going to go somewhere with a friend her parent, like their parents had met, and they wouldn't allow Laura to go. They were like, no, you can't go because you're a girl and it's unsafe, but Eddie can go off with strangers. And they're like, oh, it's fine, he's a boy. And
Right.
it was a whole very special episode. And that was 30 yeyears ago, and it's
Mhm.
unfortunate that we're still talking about it today, the gender privilege. It's like we haven't learned, or we are learning, I guess. It's never going to go away, I guess, in a way. And it's
So
like it's good to at least be educated about it. So I'm glad you are
there,
speaking about that.
there's an aspect to that too, Brooke, in the sense that, and we have to be, I think, as professors, as scholars, we have to be very careful because the point to me is always what can I do to encourage the conversation to go deeper rather than just how do I indoctrinate someone to believe what I believe? That's not how I
Yeah.
approach it. That's not what I believe in. And there's an aspect of this to show that I can acknowledge the advancements we have made. I do actually believe America, despite all of the flaws and the problems we're still trying to correct, I do believe American society in 2026 is superior to the American society in 1816.
Yeah.
But and sometimes you find young minds at least, but I find plenty of older people with the same problem. So it really isn't just a college student issue, is that they think if you're talking about something that's being critical, you physically, mentally aren't able to acknowledge achievements or advancements. And I think we have to get over that, almost that binomial interpretation of it's either one or zero,
Yeah,
right? It's either 100 or it's nothing.
exactly.
That's just not the way human society evolves or works. So we're
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah, we're hopefully getting better. Yeah. Matthew, tell us more about what role did racism play and still plays today in the erasing of people of mixed heritage and Melungeon ancestry in their history?
I have a specific story to tell on this one that actually came about because of when Heather graciously invited me to do the podcast. Some of the extra research I did after that invitation, I discovered a new story which I'd been searching for some time and had not found, and then finally found it because I had found from basically from 1760, so even before the Revolutionary War, all the way up into the 20th century. I had found census after census after census of my family on the paternal side, where every single member of the family, so all the male Crostons and all of their children, and the male Crostons really produced a lot of children, let me tell you. There was lots of them back in those days. I think in West Virginia, the Appalachian Ridge, they were creating farm hands, I think is what they were doing, because they all seem to have 5, 6, 7 children. But all of these, the censuses that I found 20 years apart, going forward through time, everyone was officially listed in these government census takers as mulatto. Every single one. Until I finally came to my great grandfather, who was Ellis Crosston, who was born in 1880. And that happened to coincide with an actual census. So I have the 1880 census that lists newborn Ellis Crosston as mulatto. But then I have a census from 1920 where Ellis Crosston is now a 40-year-old man married with 3 or 4 children. And he self-identifies and self-reports the census worker in 1920 as he and all of his children are white. So he became my patient zero. He was finally the one I wanted to find. It's like, because I have him as mulatto, as all of his previous ancestors were listed in the American census in 1880, and then as a 40-year-old man in the 20th century, where you get to self-report, he self-reports himself and all his children as white, and everyone after him. So my grandfather and my father all became white and stayed. And so that erasure was almost, again, maybe we're talking about it from the perspective of passing, because there's always one of the pieces I've written in the past that has garnered a lot of attention was this idea of who am I? If I ask the question, who am I? The answer to that question, unfortunately, in America's unhealthy fascination with race over time has always been who I am is only answered by when am I? And so it was fascinating to realize that 200 years ago, I would have been black. 100 years ago, I absolutely would have been trying to pass. And today, I'm just a white male privileged person. So I've literally gone through the entire spectrum based on who I am is based on when I am. And Ellis Crosston, for me, my great grandfather, he made that decision himself. He was born into a society that labeled him one way, and society evolved just enough from that 1880 to 1920 where he could actually take some agency over himself and his family, and he made that conscious decision to be identified in a different way. And while we've already talked earlier in the podcast about why that would be done and why that would still be unfortunately important in 1920, because we all know in 1920, we're now, fully ensconced in still Jim Crow, basically. And so there's real reasons to choose white that involve physical safety and the avoidance of physical harm. So again, I'm not casting aspersions on Ellis, but there are consequences to the decision, right? There are consequences because clearly that person knew growing up from 1880 to 1920, he knew what his family was. But he chose to create a different mythology for his children. And one of the things I always wondered when that first genetic test came through about my father was, Because I'll be honest, my father was not exactly ever known as a incredibly truthful telling man. So I always wondered, did he lie or did he not know? And so I actually now, for my own, I'll never have proof one way or the other, obviously, but I actually think he didn't know. I think he was told a lie that was created by his grandfather and was believed by his father and was given to him. So it was a self erasure in a way, right? For their own strategic purposes and for their own understandable practical purposes. But it is nonetheless an erasure that has real consequences because by the time I come around, I'm a pretty knowledgeable person in terms of being a scholar and an academic. And not only did I not know anything about that in terms of my own family, I had never even heard of terms like Black Dutch or Melungeon. So an entire side and that original genetic test that was interesting to me because I was like, do I believe this? Do I believe that I'm 25% Scandinavian and 1% Senegalese? I don't. Maybe I should take this test again and like sort of get double proof. But the test also would put you in contact with people because of their own genetic testing were 99.9% guaranteed to be related to you by blood, by genetics. And I got contacted by people out in Ohio. And for those who don't know, people who were originally in West Virginia, there's an awful lot of transplants from West Virginia into Ohio back in the late 19th, early 20th century, because as they were escaping the dying coal mining industry, they went up into the now new booming automobile industry in the rubber tire factories. But I got contacted by all these people who live in Ohio historically, who were clearly, by how they looked, clearly African American. But they were told in their own genetic testing that they were 99.9% related to me by blood. And they were actually their African history and heritage was Senegalese. So I got extra sort of confirmation from the sort of the entangled web of mixing and engagement and history from all of this. That was lost. That was lost to me, and it was just by pure luck of taking a genetic test for a completely different reason opened up an entire new family to me.
Oh yeah, I can definitely relate to that. My grandmother, she had always told us that we had Cherokee. She was like, that's why my skin is the color it is. We have Cherokee ancestry because that's what she was told. But of course, when I and other members of my family started taking the DNA test, I mean, and of course, it wasn't only, I mean, there was Native American, but of course, there was African and there was Middle Eastern and Jewish and like all these. And,
Right.
we realized we're like, okay, like it's not just Cherokee or, Native American. I'm like, this is something so much more. And, but you're right. That's what she was told.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's how she had to explain it. And I wanted to mention, when you were talking about the census, and I know when I've gone back, in our family tree, we have ancestors who were labeled, yeah, like mulatto, and then 10 years later they're white,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you're right, sometimes it was they themselves, and then but I also heard that sometimes it was just the census takers, they're like, I think this person looks, and then write
Right.
down what they think. And it's just wild. But with mixed ancestry, I mean, that's another, something that's very, that happened all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Well,
Yeah.
Matthew,
Sorry, I was
yeah,
going
go
to tell
ahead,
a
Brooke.
funny
Yeah, no,
story.
yeah. Oh,
No, I was going
no.
to say about this. Yeah, no, this is a funny. I grew up in El Paso, and El Paso is 80% Hispanic, because it's right there on the U.S.-Mexico border. But I am not Hispanic, of course. So I remember one time in college, I got pulled over, and under race, they put Hispanic, and then I tried to fight it in court and say, well, I was like, that's not
You
me.
look,
It's not
yeah.
me. Yeah,
The
it's not
officer's
me.
like,
You
you
got
look Hispanic to me. And no.
yeah. I was like, it's not me. I don't have to pay for this. You got the wrong person. And they're like, no, pay your $200
It's
speeding
interesting
ticket.
you say that, both Heather and Brooke, because I have no doubt in my mind, for example, the census takers in the 1800s and early 1900s, if you went out into those areas of in my family's case, northern Appalachia, you won't ever convince me that they didn't know already reputationally what kind of people, quote unquote, live up there. So they just were really, I think, just there to count the heads. Like I just wanted to know how many people. I wasn't asking you to identify either way, because we all know that's where those mixed people are. So you're mulatto automatically. We're not going to ask. So that type of sort of almost institutionalized perceptual bias exists without doubt, and still continues to this day to a certain degree.
Oh yeah, 100%. You definitely like where in northeastern Tennessee, the Vardy Valley, Newman's Ridge, like yeah, they knew. They're like Melungeons, lived. I mean, that's, and of course Melungeons too was a
Right.
derogatory term that was put upon them, and yeah, but you're exactly right. They knew. Yeah. And so they just,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Well, Matthew, is there anything else you would like to share with us?
Two things I have. One is more historical, one's more modern, contemporary, but they're both opportunities to me. I always think from the mind of an academic. So both of these things to me are amazing historical projects that I hope this podcast might inspire any official or unofficial historians listening to your podcast might consider pursuing it. One is that what I consider to be the missing history of quote unquote mixed America since before its founding, and then that subsequent what I consider to be that institutionalization of structural racism, because of what could have been great promise. I see Dolphin Crosston as sort of epitomizing the negative transition of that space, because it mattered to me that you could find, historically speaking, I won't exactly call it open tolerance or openly embracing these mixed people of color. But the fact is that before independence, they were not uncommon, and they were recognized and acknowledged, and they were allowed to participate in society and serve. And then right after independence, with the as I said, with Dolphin Croston's acknowledgement of a government pension and being given 100 acres of land, that shows the fact that early society, initial independent American society, acknowledged these people as legitimate citizens, able to hold property, able to receive pensions. But unfortunately, Dolphin Croston also represents the negative evolution of that society after the founding, because what I found is that unfortunately, within a single generation. So by 1780, he's receiving the pension and has 100 acres of land. By 1810, all 100 acres had been taken away from him by the state. And I have not been able to find any conclusive documentation to explain why, but I found a piece of documentation that explained it was the state. It wasn't that he sold it. It wasn't that he came to a business deal and lost it, but the state simply took it. And I have no doubt in my mind that was testimony to the evolution of those institutions after independence that were not there right at independence. So that period, I think, is really, really horribly under researched by American historians. Like, so Ken Burns, if you're listening, Ken Burns, get on this, because I think the power of your reach and influence could be really, it could make for an amazing story, because it sort of shows you the sort of unfulfilled potential. It wasn't that, because I think sometimes there's a tendency now to look at American history as always being hypocritical, right? It's like, oh, you made some pretty documents, but you were never a free society, and people were never going to accept anyone except white male property holders. I actually, because of my own diving into my Melungeon heritage, believe that's not necessarily the case in that very strange, sort of amorphous, ambiguous time, say from 1770 until about 1790, 1795. There's a 25-year period where America was still defining itself. And how it did define itself in practice was not a fulfillment of itself in theory. And it would be interesting to have someone really break all of that down. So that's one. Two is more contemporary. And I've found it interesting when I tell people my story of what I've found and what I've discovered. Everyone thinks it's a great like party trick. It's a great party story to tell at a house party or something. They find it fascinating. But it's been interesting that people of color have reacted wholeheartedly embracing. what I've discovered. And it's sort of like people of color have like open arms, welcome me to the family. We always knew you were an honorary brother, at least. Now you are a true brother. Yay. It's always been just fun and humorous, but warm-hearted and very accepting. There is one group, though, that actually hasn't been. And it's been almost one group that has sort of said, well, that's interesting. I find it fascinating. But you're just a white person. You can't lay claim to your heritage and your family. And ironically enough, that group is not the conservatives. It's the white liberals. The white liberals have denied me my family. They've denied me my history and my heritage. And to a degree, and I know they would despise me saying it like this, but what I see and what they're doing is it almost seems like to me to be a de facto inversion of the one drop rule. So 200 years ago, the one drop rule meant I would have been clearly identified simply as Black, a person of color, because I had Black blood in me. And it didn't matter how much or how little. But today, oddly, by progressives, they're kind of telling me without telling me that I'm sorry, you don't have enough Black blood in you. So it's inverting the drop. Well, how much is enough? Is it majority? I have to be 51% Senegalese? Or is it a third? Is a third enough? Or is it a quarter? Or is it just double digits? You want to see me have 10%. If I'm single digits, it's not good enough. And it's just fascinating to me, especially when we look back and we've talked about some of that historical documentation that I found. I can trace my name and my family's name back about 270 years to the very founding of America. 170 years of that, all the physical documentation has my family as mulatto. Only the last 100, because of one person's conscious self-reporting decision, has my family as white. But there are people telling me today that I can't embrace the 170 years of my history. I can only embrace the last 100. And I find that to be something that we probably need to examine a little more closely, something that we maybe need to analyze and discuss more openly, because I obviously think it's wrong, but I would love to see it be a more open-ended, civil, respectful, of course, but a debate and a discussion. Because it's fascinating that the ones who are telling me, no, I can't have it, are the people who typically stand for diversity, equity, inclusion, who are there for progressive ideals. But somehow I'm now... So it's just interesting to me how 200 years ago, well, you can't be white because you've got a little bit of that blood in you. And today, I can't be Black because I don't have enough of that blood in me. So that's all I wanted to add to that. And again, I speak to it not from resentment, but just I find them fascinating areas of discussion, intellectual discussion that we should explore more as a society.
I agree. I've had similar experiences.
I was thinking of you. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, another topic for another podcast.
Yes. I think so, Brooke and Matthew. I think we definitely should. I 100% agree. Because you have so many people learning about this being a part of their ancestry, so many reaching out, and they're light complected, they're dark complected, they're everything in between, and it's like it's still, it is your ancestry. You do have the right to learn about your ancestors and to be proud of that and to want to learn more about it. It is something that I think would be a wonderful another podcast episode, maybe to get a little more deeper into it. I would love that. Definitely.
And it just, to me, it's fascinating to me. There is, as a scholar, again, I keep repeating that, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it's saying one of the problems scholars always face is we're always faced with the pressure to produce something new and original. And it's awfully hard to find an original thing, meaning something that's not already been covered, something that's not been researched. That's not really very easy as a task. It's one of the true challenges young scholars often face. But I've been amazed in just the research I've done from my own family, whether it's Black Dutch or Melungeon or all of these issues we've been talking about, how little is actually researched officially, formally on it. It's actually podcasts like this, people like both you and Brooke, bring a lot of new information to light, but I find it horribly under-researched in the formal scholarly field. So I'm hoping that that might change over time, because it's, like I said, it's one of the areas where there's just a lot of nothing out there. Like, and I'm sure there's a lot of information to be found, but people aren't looking at it.
Oh, definitely. And I will say, certainly, I mean, even knowing what I know, upon learning about this, about my family and my ancestry, and learning more about it, uh, when we did this season 6, and we're like, for the 250th, we're going to focus on the free people of color and people of mixed ancestry in the American Revolution. And so, like, all of our guests have just been wonderful. And we've been learning so much about that, now that you're looking at it, you're like, why wasn't this taught in
Mhm.
your US history courses? Because there were a lot of free people of color and people of mixed ancestry who fought in the American Revolution.
Right.
And it's just astounding that it's not, but I'm also sure there's a reason for that.
Well, and there's always been, and there's always elitism mixed in with a lot of it too.
Yeah.
I won't name the society because I'm not here to like cast aspersion, but there is a society in America that tries to get people who have ancestors who fought in the American Revolution to connect with others and get recognized. But they wouldn't accept mine because Dolphin wasn't an officer. He was just enlisted. So I was like, you've got to be kidding. So
Yeah.
there's always a healthy little bit of elitism to throw in there too, half the time.
Yeah, yeah. That is unfortunate. That's yeah. But I can see I can see it. It's a shame. Yeah. Well, Matthew, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you
Great.
today, and thank you so much for being on our podcast. And you'll be back. I mean it. Yeah, Brooke and I, we're
Awesome.
definitely going to do another. Yeah, we'll do another episode and get in deeper with some of this. Uh, but I did want to mention our next month's guest, which is Dr. Terry Mullins. So this year's Melungeon Heritage Association's 30th annual union conference is going to be in Tazewell, Virginia on June 26th and 27th. So Dr. Mullins will be sharing with us the important role that Tazewell, Virginia played in the American Revolution and its connection to the Melungeon people. So we want to thank the BA 250 Commission and the Virginia Humanities for the grant that made this podcast season possible. Thank you again, Matthew, and thank you,
Thank you
Brooke.
both.
And we'll see everyone next
Thank
month.
you. Yeah.
Well, we've traveled very far. Where we've been is who we are. We are standing proud and strong. We'll use our strength to carry on. We are Melungeon. We are Melungeon. Our voices shouting our stories of our defeats and victories.